afternoon. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. My name is Corliss King, and I have the distinct honor of moderating a powerful panel that are going to speak to women's issues and the landscape of women's issues in politics. Because we are so short on time, we're going to give each panelist an opportunity to introduce themselves and the organization that they come from, and we're going to right into the conversation.
Okay.
Melissa?
Good afternoon. I'm Melissa Widen. I'm an attorney and I am chair of the board of Personal PAC, which is an Illinois political action committee that raises money to elect pro-choice candidates to state and local office.
I'm Heidi Seick, the co-founder and CEO of Vote Pro-Choice, and I'm a member of the board of the National Institute for Reproductive Health.
Hi everybody, I'm Sasha Bruce. I'm the Senior Vice President for NARAL Pro-Choice America. And I'm here representing our 1.2 million members in all 50 states where we advocate for and against bad legislation and elect pro-choice leaders and champion around the country.
And good afternoon. My name is Oren Jacobson. I'm the co-founder and executive director of an organization in Illinois called Men for Choice, and we work to engage, educate, and activate men to be partners in the fight for reproductive freedom here in Illinois.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So one of the things that I wanted to throw out there, because it's kind of what motivated everybody to pull this together, is what in the hell happened in 2016? The statistics said one thing and voters did something else. So I want to kind of throw it out and ask, in a nutshell, what happened with women voters in 2016? Let me throw this out to you, Heidi.
Oh, I get to do this one. That's delightful. What happened? Well, many things happened, as we know, but I can speak a little bit to the question of why did so many women vote for Donald Trump? I think that's underlying this question here. And the National Institute for Reproductive Health conducted some focus groups of women voters in Ohio, and they were white women voters in Ohio who were pro-choice voters and had voted for Obama in 2 elections and then voted for Donald Trump. And they said 2 things that they said a lot of things, but 2 that really kind of piqued my interest and motivated the work we do at Vote Pro-Choice, which is electing down ballot candidates. They said one thing, they said, well, we don't vote on the issue of abortion and reproductive rights, we vote on the economy. And that, I lit up and thought, well, access to reproductive health care services, including abortion, is an economic justice issue. And so therefore, we as a reproductive rights movement have not done a good job about talking about these issues in a really broad economic justice way. My mentor, Kamala Harris, would always say, when people would say, well, what do you think about women's issues, Kamala? She would look at them slyly and say, I would like to talk about the economy now, thank you. You know, because that is what it's about. And we haven't been framing, we've not been framing these issues in a way that is really about the foundation of our society, which is the half of the planet gets to have a life that is based on their freedom and their dignity and how they want to plan families. And then secondly, what they said is, well, you know, we know Donald Trump, we didn't really think Donald Trump was anti-choice. We thought he just had to say those things in order to get elected. So I don't know really what to do with that information, but it does give us a peek into that voter, and that there's a lot of work that we need to do for ourselves and also in connecting and working with women, and I use that term broadly, including our transgender brothers and sisters. We have to include our transgender brothers and sisters in that conversation around the issues that we're not properly addressing.
So you touched on women's reproductive rights. What is Illinois doing in particular? What are we doing right about protecting women's reproductive rights? And what do we need to do better about engaging and framing the conversation about women's reproductive rights?
So I can talk to that. So if you're from Illinois, you have most likely heard about House Bill 40, which is really the most important piece of pro-choice legislation ever in the history of Illinois that was recently signed into law. A huge victory for the women of Illinois. Really important law for a lot of reasons. It does 3 primary things. It repeals the trigger law, which is language in the Illinois statutes that says if Roe versus Wade was ever overturned, then abortion would immediately become illegal in Illinois. So that language is now gone. It removes the state ban on using Medicaid funds to pay for poor women's abortions. So it's essentially the state equivalent of the Hyde Amendment is now repealed. And it also repeals the prohibition on having private insurers cover abortions for state employees. So that's about 250,000 women whose private insurance plans were not allowed to include abortion care. So this is a hugely important law, will affect the lives of over 1 million poor women in this state. And we are really, really proud that this law was passed, that this bill was finally passed into law. You know, it's quite a story of how it got from sort of after the election, the idea that the trigger law that was on the books in Illinois could actually could ever sort of come to pass, assuming that Roe versus Wade under a Trump administration was going to be gone in the next couple of years. That really was the motivator to get this law passed. And the effort to get the law passed was the product of a lot of effective compromise, coalition building between a lot of organizations in Illinois. We have a very effective reproductive rights coalition here, which has a lot to do with how we were able to get a law like this passed. And the other really notable thing about Illinois is that we have one organization, Personal PAC, which is focused solely on electing pro-choice candidates to state and local office. So you have to have the votes here in Illinois. It's in Springfield in order to get a law like this passed. And we have an organization that is focused on every election cycle, making sure that people know what are the positions of all of the candidates out there, and engaging people to vote, to think about that when they vote. And you know, again, this goes back to elections matter. Elections are critical, and that motivating people to vote and motivating people to vote, keeping their priorities, including reproductive rights, in mind is really key.
Are you seeing other states attempting to replicate the Illinois model? As we're seeing this extreme push to take it from the federal level to the state and local levels, are you seeing other states reaching out, or are you working with other states perhaps to help push the Illinois successful model forward?
You know, there's nothing like the Personal PAC in other states in the country, and we think there should be, because right. You know, Illinois is sort of the island when it comes to reproductive rights. You look at the surrounding states, and all of the states, many of the states in this country, but certainly the states in the Midwest have multiple restrictions on a woman's right to have a safe and legal abortion. And Illinois, while we do have some, we have much less than our neighbors. So we think it's a very effective vehicle for really getting voters motivated, informing voters, and making sure voters elect pro-choice candidates who can then vote for the bills and vote to defeat the anti-choice bills once they come to the legislature.
Awesome. Sasha, did you want to add something?
Yeah, if I could chime in, the work around HB 40 is amazing, and Personal PAC and the ACLU and everybody that contributed to that. And I will say absolutely other state governors, other state legislatures are looking at this legislation, because repealing Hyde is part of what we're really reaching for as an ideal of, you know, achieving the vision of Roe. The vision of Roe wasn't just that abortion was legal in this land, it's that all women could have access to abortion to help control, you know, their own choices and their own destiny. But when so many women in this country cannot jump through the hurdles that state legislatures and governors have put in front of them, and cannot afford to access the health care that is abortion, that is just a hurdle most women in this country cannot overcome. And so what was achieved here is a big, big moment and should be celebrated. We certainly do at NARAL. Part of what we're really paying attention to is what the anti-choice community and the anti-choice organizations are unleashing at the governor because of signing this bill. And that is also what other states are looking at. And I think that when electeds do courageous things, in recognizing, particularly with this elected, they don't do everything that we like, right? They're not always our ideal candidate. But on this bill, we also have to walk the balance of championing the movement when they're also getting attacked from the far right. And that's part of what other states are looking at, folks that are interested in taking the steps that was taken here under the leadership of Personal PAC and others.
Yeah, that's an interesting nuance. I know with Vote Pro-Choice, we have a theory of change that's similar to yours, that if we elect pro-choice candidates in every single election at every level of government, we have the opportunity to save some of the rights that we've lost in the states. And let's be real, in the last, 20 years or so, we've had hundreds and hundreds of bills that have been introduced and hundreds that have been enacted in states to roll back these rights, and that it is critical that we do focus, as we've talked about all day, on these down ballot races and really be voting pro-choice in every single election. But I know that there's been interesting work in Oregon. I know New York is working on a Reproductive Health Act, and there's a lot of states that who can, and California obviously is always adding and expanding rights. And we just have to continue to look to those models and do our best to try to get great pro-choice state legislators to be sponsoring these bills. And I will also say, I will add, and Sasha and I both we use NARAL's research when we say this. 7 in 10 American voters believe a woman should have access to abortion, and that is Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, Independent, everybody, and that's everywhere in this nation. That pro-choice, abortion access is actually a winning strategy and a winning perspective, and that should actually be an issue that our candidates lead on because it wins elections. And to think that not talking about it or calling it a single issue is just, it's not correct. And it's a new way that we actually really need to step out in front and be talking about it, because the data shows that we can win on this issue, and we should.
So one of the things that we've seen a real push for is this conversation around these wedge issues, that a lot of times the narrative, though, while what you're saying is statistically correct, the narrative is being controlled by someone else with someone else's agenda. So Sasha, can you speak to how do we take the gloss and the sexiness off of the wedge issues and bring it back to the commonality or the common issues and make that conversation a common conversation? How do you find the common ground in that?
Sure. I will actually push back a little bit first on the term wedge issue, mostly because it is a term that we hear a lot from the media, from politicians that have really internalized the fact that abortion rights and reproductive rights is a politically risky issue. What we have sought, and I think effectively over the past 4 years, to really poke holes in is that that is actually broken conventional wisdom. On the progressive side, being anti-choice is actually a disqualifier far more often than it ever is not. And it is politically opportunistic to stand behind the issue of women's reproductive rights and to campaign for it. I'll bring it home to a localized example in a second, but I want to go back to the presidential for a moment. Hillary Clinton, put aside what everybody thinks about candidates for a second, was our general election candidate who, sure, supported women's reproductive rights, but as a Democratic presidential candidate, nobody ever questioned that whoever our general election candidate would be wouldn't stand behind that. But she campaigned for it, and she campaigned for overturning Hyde, which means the government paying for abortions for women who cannot afford it. Now, on the Republican side, given what a hot-button wedge issue this supposedly is, do you think they ran one campaign ad, one series of mailers in any battleground state from the Trump administration or any Republican super PAC? Not one.
This is an important point.
And
this is a very important point.
I haven't seen their internal polling, but I guarantee you that they were polling on how effective people were thinking about this issue at the ballot box. And it was not an effective attack on our presidential candidate.
Yeah.
So, to bring it home to a localized example, which is what you asked me to talk about, NARAL has been on the ground in 2 key states for the past 3 years. We started with Iowa, a year out from the caucuses, and then we were in Nevada about 18 months, 2 years ago. And for us, a deep investment in a state has to have at its foundation membership base and proof that our membership can grow, proof that our issue is actually an effective resonance with constituents that we're trying to mobilize. So our first plan of action is always mobilizing a canvas in a key geographic region, usually suburbs of a town. It was suburbs of Des Moines in Iowa, it was Reno, and it was suburbs of Vegas in Nevada. But that was the extent of our targeting, meaning we're running a canvas and we're talking to everybody we get at the door. We're blindly knocking Republicans, Democrats, men, women, independents. Of the conversations we had on the doors in Iowa, possibly the whitest place that I've ever been.
It's true.
We had 60% signups to be a NARAL member on the doors. And what we talked to people about was what we called the full spectrum of reproductive rights. To achieve the dream, we want to make sure that we have birth control access when we don't want to get pregnant. We want to make sure that we have abortion access when we're pregnant and don't want to be. We want to make sure that we have workplace discrimination so we can't be fired for being pregnant out of wedlock or having an abortion. And we want to have paid family leave. So nobody is out there thinking, man, I really got a plan for that abortion I'm going to have in 3 years.
Right.
But they are thinking about having a family. Or if they're not thinking about a family, they know people that they love who are. And that's a way to connect with everybody. And 60% sign up on the doors, I'm telling to you, is an astronomical number, but was unbelievable to me at first. I thought the canvas was cooking the books. And we poked all kinds of holes in it, and the numbers were true. Not only were they true, but when a year later we opened up our office in Nevada, statewide, the numbers proved true too. 60% sign-ups of every conversation we had on the door.
These are sign-ups for NARAL membership.
To be activists.
Oh my goodness.
And a totally different demographic in Nevada. So I really challenge the conventional thinking of treating this as a wedge issue because, as Heidi said, when you talk to people about what it really means, everybody can support it. And even on the Democratic side, this fallacy between pro-life Democrats and pro-choice Democrats, there are, in fact, lots of pro-life Democrats or anti-choice Democrats. Tim Kaine is one. He was a vice presidential nominee. He is anti-choice personally. When he goes to pull that lever on legislation, he understands that he was not elected to make that decision for his constituents. And that actually, when you talk to people about the difference, that you can actually be against abortion personally, but not tell Heidi what she needs to do.
I love that.
Because that's always a bad idea.
It's not a complicated thing for people to understand.
I'll add to that too, because we did about a dozen canvases around the state of Illinois after HB 40 passed.
Oh.
And what we did was we went into the districts where we had the most trouble convincing the Democrats who voted for the bill to vote for the bill, sort of giving them a little bit of cover, making sure that the constituents know that they stood up for these issues. We got more signatures at the doors from men on the petitions we were gathering than we did from women.
Yeah.
So I think this notion that it is really a divided issue is nonsense. The other thing I would say to this is, for progressives to believe that someone who places blocking access to abortion, that individual is ever going to vote for a Democratic or progressive candidate is complete nonsense. It's just not going to happen. And then on top of that, when you tell the world that I'm willing to compromise on the rights and equality and freedom of half of the people in the country, what you also tell the world is you stand for nothing. And so this notion that we shouldn't own and embrace this, to me, is nonsense.
To you, Oren, in particular, when you're having these conversations, when in your organization, you're specifically reaching out to men about these issues, what type of talking points are you using when you're not talking to your friends, but talking to people who are not your friends?
Yeah.
What are your talking points when you talk to them about these issues?
So as an organization, we don't focus at all on persuasion. It's entirely about activating passive supporters. So just quick data point, there's about 2.3 million men in Illinois who have been identified by Facebook's algorithm, whatever that's worth, as likely progressives or Democrats. Only 80,000 have been identified as likely pro-choice, right? So we know that that 2 million gap is likely with us on this issue, and all we're trying to do is get them to say, you need to own this too. And that was really the emphasis behind the Call Bullshit campaign. Am I allowed to swear, by the way?
Yes, please.
So that was the emphasis behind the Call Bullshit campaign, is that ultimately men don't have to put up with these issues, so women shouldn't have to either. And so the way that we've tried to frame it is sort of turning the issue around, although there is no comparison, and asking guys, what if this was what the government was doing to you? What if the government said you had to drive 500 miles to access not a legal safe procedure, just healthcare in general, right? When you shut down Planned Parenthood clinics in Iowa, you make people drive hundreds of miles for basic healthcare. What if the government was telling you what you could and couldn't do with your body? And the answer that all of them eventually get to is, we'd stand up and fight. So the next question is, okay, then why are you so silent on this issue? And so we sort of start in this gendered place of saying we're going to talk to guys. We then turn the issue onto them as if men are being punished. We establish this notion that you wouldn't be okay with the government infringing on your rights. And if you're not okay with the government infringing on the rights of you as an individual to have that bodily autonomy and real freedom, then you shouldn't be okay with the government doing it to anybody regardless of gender. And once you've arrived at that place, you have an obligation, responsibility to step up. And so that's really what we've tried to do. I'm really proud of the fact that 90% of our donors have no proven donation history to pro-choice organizations before coming to Men for Choice. 63% of them are men. And so all we're trying to do is sort of grow the pie and bring in more activists, more donors to stand alongside these women and help in the fight.
One more quick question. Are you married? Because you just got really attractive. All these things.
What was the question?
I'll tell you that. So one of the things that I want to do is ask you guys, and I'll go down quick fire, if you could tell your 2016 self something, what would you tell your 2016 self something pre-election that you've learned now? Go, Melissa. They weren't expecting this one.
Elections matter. Every vote counts.
Keep doing what you're doing, but do it bigger and braver with more courage.
I love it.
Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
Right?
Talking about what you're against and who you're against doesn't work. We need to talk about what we stand for and who we're fighting for.
Powerful. Are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions? Do we have any fluffy cubes we need to throw around? There's one over there.
That's hilarious.
My question is, how do the various pro-choice organizations work together? Because it's been my unprofessional observation that in the past there hasn't been a lot of coordination. So could you address how the organizations can work together to get the kind of results that we're all looking for?
So I can just speak about what's going on in Illinois. In Illinois, we have a very effective coalition. There are around 40 reproductive rights organizations that regularly get together, talk, exchange ideas, talk about strategies. We have there's like a three-legged stool among this coalition made up of Personal PAC, the ACLU, and Planned Parenthood, and we all do different things and have different focuses, but we work together very effectively, and I think this bill is an example of that it could not have passed if it weren't for the coordination, the communication, and just the work that all of the organizations did, but especially those three, to get this done. So you are right. It is so important as a movement. We need to come together and pool all of our resources, and there are lots of examples of how that's being done very well.
Heidi, you want to?
And I also share a message of hope. Vote Pro-Choice really was founded with the idea that 7 in 10 American voters believe a woman should have access to abortion that is safe, legal, accessible, affordable, and without shame. Those are specific words. But we've lost a lot of ground, and we've lost a lot of pieces of legislation, so something's up. Planned Parenthood, NARAL, and all the organizations do work very well together, and they have certain roles, and Planned Parenthood works to work on its clinics. NARAL works on the federal and congressional and the statewide work, and they're busy and they're being taxed. And so it is our responsibility as a progressive movement, the Men for Choice, the Move-Ons, the Progress Now, all the other organizations out there to really make this a core issue too and come help the sisters. So that's why Vote Pro-Choice was founded under the umbrella of Democrats.com to help our sisters at Planned Parenthood and NARAL and all the folks that are doing the work, because they clearly, we need to all engage more.
Yeah, and one thing that happened here too that I just want to add to this.
And we are working togetger, yes.
Was not just like the core organizations that you think of, but like there became this email thread that got built out with Ben Head, who's the co-founder of the organization, with Personal PAC, with ACLU, with Planned Parenthood, and then Indivisible Illinois, Indivisible Chicago, the Handmaidens, the HB 40 Task Force, and so you had sort of these organizations that were the leaders sort of directing and guiding, but constantly communicating with all these activists, and were able to leverage it in different ways across the state to just keep pressure on the governor to sign that bill. And I think that was really, one of the most impressive things of all of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this panel has to wrap before they turn the lights out. But thank you so much for listening to these incredible speakers and this impassioned topic.